Hi, I'm Kent.
And I'm Anna.
We're married, we make movies, and we believe that anyone in any circumstance can make a feature film.
Welcome to the Feature Filmmaker Podcast. If you want a career making movies, you're in the right place.
Hit subscribe to never miss an episode.
Let's jump right in. Hi, welcome to the podcast. Today we will be highlighting another director for our Success Patterns series.
We chose a director that you are assuredly going to be familiar with. His name is Christopher Nolan. He makes movies with his wife, who produces each of his films, so we can relate to that, Emma Thompson. So if you haven't heard of Christopher Nolan, he's directed films such as The Dark Knight and the whole Dark Knight trilogy,
Inception,
Memento,
The Prestige,
Interstellar. I mean, he's made a lot of movies.
Sure, you've heard of him. Okay.
Dunkirk was like his one big Oscar bid, I feel like, as best director.
He's been nominated several times for best screenwriting.
Has he?
Mm-hmm. His second one, Memento, he and his brother both got.
Jonathan
Yeah.
got nominated for Memento?
Yeah.
But they got, wow. Well, that was one department where I actually thought they've gotten a lot of flack and criticism. Well, anyway, that's interesting. So his movies have been in the Oscars for sure. I didn't know he'd gotten screenwriting nominations. He's gotten one Best Director nomination, I think, and that's Dunkirk, which also got nominated for Best Picture, which I think is the only time that he's had a film in that category. Regardless, who cares about the Oscars? We're talking about Christopher Nolan, and he's made a lot of very, very successful films. And so his latest is Tenet, and we're going to be talking about his earliest, not his latest film,
His
Following.
Yes, very first feature film, which we've seen, Following. He made that. Well, let's talk about how he got into film, first of all, a little bit. Sounds like he and his wife both got into film doing little short films. They said they didn't go to film school, but they had a camera, they had a roll of 16 mil, and they did this competition where you'd make a 3-minute film. And they'd do that every year and said it was much better than film school because you can end up making only a 10-minute film after 2 years in film school. And sometimes that's true. I think sometimes you come out with, not very much stuff, depending on the school.
Yeah, well, and those 10-minute films are usually tricky because they're conceptually so loose. I feel like they almost always are exploring so much, and you kind of get shoehorned into working with people that are just fellow students that you may or may not know very well or work together with very well. But, when you're just doing it like you and a few close people with whatever resources you have, and you can make it about anything, and you have to make it in 3 minutes, I can see how that has informed his career,
Yeah.
because his 3-minute films were all very conceptually focused, like really strong conceptually. So
Yeah, and I guess I should mention the point of this series is to look at the patterns that modern successful filmmakers have followed to have success in this industry. And this is something that we've done for many, many directors, is broken down. Okay, what did they do? What do they all have in common? Just to show you what you can do in your own career that is tested and proven. And we've developed our own process and method that we teach in the Feature Filmmaking Academy based on these patterns that we see directors doing. And we just like to take individuals and outline them for you. And I'd say the number one thing is just that they make it happen themselves using their resources, whatever they have. And they always start with a cheap feature doing that.
Well, and some people have cameras, some people don't. Some people do it with friends and family, and some people, their human resources are different. Some people go to film school and get formally educated, and some people don't. And there's really no like, it has to be this way or that way kind of a deal. And so we're going to look at Christopher Nolan and look at the specific resources that he used to create the specific story that he made with his wife, Emma Thompson, and how they pulled it together and what that film did for them ultimately.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that he did get these Academy Awards for writing, and he said
Nominations.
Nominations. He might have won. I don't remember.
He didn't.
But he just said that he got into writing, and I'll read the quote here, because no one's going to give you a script to direct when you're starting out. So I started writing just for myself, just to be able to direct things. So he wasn't really attached to the idea of needing to write his own stuff, but he did it because he wanted to make stuff. And so while you can work with a writer, I think it's also fine to just write it out.
Well, and Chris McQuarrie, the director of Mission Impossible 6, sets a very similar thing, but almost from the opposite way, right? He was like, oh, I wrote this film, and then I was working and doing all this stuff in Hollywood, and then I got this Oscar nomination, or I can't remember. Something big happened for him. And then he said, my career stalled for 7 years. And he said the one thing that filmmakers need to do, and writers specifically, he's speaking to writers because he was kind of like, I'm going to be a writer. He says, you just realize, if you want a film career, make movies. So whatever hats you've got to put on, whatever skills you've got to learn, make movies. And he said your career will stall if you're just waiting for the career to be handed to you or whatever. And so I really like that quote because it shows that Christopher Nolan and the people who worked with him were like, okay, let's just make something, we're going to make it. What are we going to make it about? Okay, well, I guess we'll have to write it once we come up with what it's about. Who's going to shoot it? Well, I've got a camera. I'll hit the record button. It's like, oh, we have to get so-and-so. We have to have such and such. And I see people do this all the time. Honestly, I do. I see it in Utah. I see it in Atlanta. I hear about it in LA. Everyone's like, well, who are you going to get to DP it? And who are you going to get to act in it? And and it's just like, make something.
Yeah.
You can pick up the camera and figure it out. You can learn editing.
He did shoot it and edit it himself and write it himself.
I'm not minimizing the ridiculous amount of skill and artistry that goes into every single department. I'm just saying, when you're starting, start with what you have, and you have yourself,
And
you collaborate with you.
Yeah, that later does inform how you work with those people when you do hire them on. You'll know a little more of what to look for and how to tell if they know what they're doing, and it'll just help you communicate better. So one of the resources that he would use, and this is another thing that he said, everyone's circumstance is unique. You really have to look around at what you've got available and see how you can tell the story you want to tell using the things that you have around you. And this is always one of the first things we encourage people to do in the Feature Filmmaker Academy, is to take a look at your resources. What do you have? What can you use that's unique? And he said,
many people have said it, but I think that just serves to show how, if we get tired of hearing that, but I think we don't need to get tired of hearing it. We need to get tired of doing it because we need to do it. I think that's just the only way to start.
And once you do it, you'll be one of those people who can't stop saying it because you just realize how true it is.
Yeah. And Jared Hess talks about it. I know everyone talks about Rodriguez. They always quote him.
That's always the advice they give. I thought it was funny that he said, once I've made a film, I move on to the next. Usually at the same time, I move into a new flat so I can use it as a location. Hence, I moved a lot, which I just thought was funny because that is one of your resources, where you live. And we used our own house and we're still repairing it from the damage done from shooting our film, and so worth it.
Yeah, well, it was good. It was a good location. And by the time it looks completely different and we finally finish putting in new floor and paint and scrape together, the year's worth of money that it'll take to get this house presentable, it'll look like a completely new location. We'll be able to make a new movie in it. So.
This is true. So they were making these short films to start out, he and his wife together, and they shot this 8-minute film about a burglary. It cost them 200 pounds, they said. And so they used that math to create the budget for their feature film and basically said, okay, that means we can make an 80-minute movie for 2K pounds. So that's basically what they did. And they decided to just do black and white, entirely handheld. In their case, they didn't raise any money for it. He just said he had a job. Every time he got his paycheck, he'd pay the rent, and then the other half went into buying film stock.
So I think that's so interesting because basically their mentality, just follow the train of logic here in this story. So my mentality always goes to, okay, what's the budget? I can't possibly write down a budget until I've looked at the script and said, okay, I got to break the script down, because that's what I was taught in film school, right? I have to highlight every little element in every color for art and for props and for makeup and for set and for costumes. And, I've got to consider locations, and I've got to consider what's everybody's salaries. They were like, okay, we're going to use whatever props we have, whatever clothes we have, and whatever actors are willing to do it, can do it, and don't need money.
No one's getting paid on this.
No one's getting paid anything, so that's all zero. Our budget is zero.
They said we just need the stock.
Oh,
we just need the film, and that's not even a thing anymore.
We have a camera. We need a film stock. Now what you need a budget for is hard drives. If you have a computer and a camera, it's hard drives. No joke. Like
shoot on your phone.
A feature film. I will say that Kent's 21st century filmmaking advice is don't forget to budget for hard drives. But aside from that, all you need is human resources, whatever random resources you happen to have, and time.
Yeah.
And if you are poor and you live in a very poor community, you have a pre-art decorated, person-filled community that you could shoot a film in. Like, I know that sounds silly, but like people pay millions of dollars to create a row of huts or cheap apartments, and they decorate them to look like they're dirty, and so
or
like
they use real locations and they pay the people who live there, and they're like, okay, don't clean your house because we want it to look exactly how it is, and then they show up and it's all cleaned, and they're like, no.
But so like my point is that whatever is around you it's so easy to see through it.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, I see this every day. There's nothing special about this because doesn't everyone, take this for granted? But really, there's something about where you live, who you live around or near. There's stories that you have all around you that if you can do that and write for your resources, you could make a movie for next to nothing, except for the cost of either film stock, which I don't recommend nowadays, or
modern equivalent hard drives,
or the cost of hard drives, which, I'm watching a YouTuber right now who is developing his first feature, which is interesting. And he just talked about what camera he's going to be shooting on. I won't say who, I won't say what camera. But everything he shoots on otherwise is a very affordable kind of prosumer level camera. But he's planning on shooting this on a major Hollywood camera because he lists a bunch of movies that have shot on this big Hollywood camera. And I'm wondering why he doesn't shoot it on the camera that he already has, because his stuff looks great. His stuff looks really good on the prosumer camera. He's very resourceful. He's a good DP, and he seems like a talented filmmaker. He could totally make his first feature for dirt cheap on that camera, and it would look great, and nobody would know. I wouldn't even know. He could say, I shot this on the Alexa LF, and I'd watch it and go, I would never know that it was a prosumer full frame camera. Like,
you really can't tell that much. And
if you're good, you can't tell. I mean, if you're bad, you can't tell that you shot it on a super expensive camera, So
well, and Tangerine even got a lot of attention because it was shot on a phone, and everyone was like, oh, yeah, that's so cool.
But I mean, it was actually like, artistically had something to say, and it was powerful. It wasn't just like that was the only thing people talked about, but it was a talking point. And so your camera probably won't be a talking point unless you do use a phone, which is fine. There's stuff out there, but it's really, once again, if you have access to a camera, you could almost anyone could get access to like a DSLR mirrorless camera for free.
Yeah.
Just find someone.
Well, and I love the approach they made even with time. So he was working his job, right? His paychecks were paying for rent and stock. That was the budget. And they said whatever they had to be able to buy stock, that's what they would shoot that week. So he said, I shot over 14 weekends, shooting 15 minutes of footage a day, and thought theoretically that would be enough to get the film made. And he also said, I knew that if we just ran out of money, we could stop for a couple weeks. I was not going to process anything because that was expensive. I was just going to keep shooting. So they didn't have the money to finish as they went. They were just like, what can we get this week?
And do you see, he couldn't even process the film to start cutting because they just said, we're going to keep shooting until we've got that done. Then we'll save up week to week and just process footage. Then we'll save up and we'll get into how he edited it because he had to get a Moviola or some sort of, cutting machine back then. And
then we'll get money for festivals and see what we do there.
And I know we talk about this like this was so long ago in the past. It was just pre-digital wave. Like this was 1999. This was within most of our lifetimes, which is kind of crazy to think. Like this was in the last 20-ish years that no one had ever heard of this super obscure filmmaker. And literally from 1999 when Following came out, 2005, Batman Begins came out. Think of what a leap happened in that career from 99 to 2005. So like, I don't know. I just think that's like incredible to like say like, okay, like a lot of things have changed in the film industry nowadays. Like we don't cut on moviolas. We have digital. you could edit the movie while you go along if you shot it on weekends like he did, because like, I mean, if you're paying for Premiere or if you've paid for DaVinci or Final
Or if you
Cut,
can use the schools or
or if
something,
you can
if
use,
you're
yeah,
a student.
whatever, like public libraries, you could probably install some of this software on. I don't know how that would go, but
Use your iMovie.
use your iMovie, whatever.
Whatever you've got.
People cut stuff on cell phones. Most of us have more resources than that nowadays, and I just think the fact that he made it work with how few resources that he had, and I feel like people nowadays. I had someone tell me I could never make a movie for $25,000. They told us you cannot make a movie for $25,000 because that wouldn't even pay for deliverables. Why are you even thinking about deliverables if you're making an indie film that's your first feature film? Just get it made and figure the deliverables out after. That's like they weren't even planning. They were just like, yeah, we'll kind of figure it out. You can learn how to create the deliverables or find someone to help you. We've fortunate enough to know someone who's helping us with most of that. It's a lot of work, but I don't know. It's just this mentality that you can't possibly make a film for $25K is ridiculous. You can make a film for $0K, right?
Right.
Like you can make a film for nothing. You have available resources. Almost everyone has some sort of computation in their pocket or in their home. Most people own at least a desktop or a laptop. It doesn't have to be super powerful. Hard drives are cheap. Cameras are cheap, and they're everywhere now. Sometimes they're in our pockets, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just there's so many resources now. We have little excuse to make.
Well, and I love Christopher Nolan's story just because of the time. Because I think for a lot of people, that's a big hang up too, is when will I have time to make a whole feature film? I've got a job, I have responsibilities, how am I going to get everyone together? And I love that they just did it on weekends and minutes a day. On some days, he said 14 weekends shooting 15 minutes of footage. So that just goes to show you can spread it out like that. It's not traditional. Most people don't do that. Usually you want to compress shooting as much as possible, but you could.
Could
you
you
just keep
imagine-
your job, and that's kind of what we did.
Could you imagine being on set and being given like an SD card or CFast card or whatever your camera takes media-wise and being told, all right, you're going to shoot in this codec on this camera with this card. It's enough for 15 minutes of raw footage. And whenever you run out of space on the card, you're done for the day. It's like, that's incredible.
wrap.
That's incredible. It's like, okay, guys, we're done for today. We'll do some more tomorrow when I finish dropping all of this footage, which they couldn't have done because it was just film stock for them. So they were just buying another roll the next day.
Yeah.
I just think that's incredible.
And then here's the other interesting one. The crew. Let's talk about their crew. So their cast was consistent, which there weren't that many characters. It wasn't too complicated.
It's mainly 3, yeah.
Yeah. But the crew, they said, was whoever was around. And they said the thing about our group of friends is instead of hanging around drinking coffee all Saturday long, we would just get together and make movies. Sounds like high school,
Right.
It's fun. But then the other quote that I wanted to share, and I know we have a lot of quotes, it's just we found this interview with him and his wife shortly after they made their first
They gave this interview.
feature film.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
really nice.
So
And he said, I've listened to people who say you've got to get a good sound guy. You've got to get a really good DP. I don't agree with that. We would never have got our film made if we'd worked with people more experienced than ourselves. For a start, they demand a whole new level of equipment, which we just couldn't provide.
I will attest to that that was one of the biggest problems. I DP'd our first feature and produced it. We just didn't have the hands to do sound ourselves, but sound was a nightmare. I couldn't get people flown in from Utah to do it, which would have been my first choice. And then we had our sound person get COVID day one, and it was just this person we didn't even know, but they agreed to do it for like $150 a day. Right there, you're at a different level than Chris Nolan's film, right? He wasn't
Yeah.
paying anyone at all. I put an ad out for $150 day rate on Facebook and got criticized up the wazoo for putting it out because they were like, that is offensive that you would offer so little money a day to do sound. And I'm like, someone wants it, the opportunity.
Yeah, our sound was often people who were completely inexperienced in sound. We had several days where we would just get whoever we could get. There was a girl who would sometimes babysit for us.
We had a high schooler operating a Zoom H6.
And there was
with a
another
mic.
high schooler who I'd met who wanted to help out on something.
Oh, yeah, he came and boom off one day.
Yep. And we had to sit down and train them and say, here's how you mix, here's how you do it. Like,
Now
here you go.
And there's two people worth mentioning. We did have one guy named Patrick who came and did a half day. He
Yeah.
was great to work with in the Atlanta area, but he was expensive. But he was very, very last minute, and he came in clutch. But the other two people who came in clutch were Kai, who did it for a really, really cheap rate. He was still learning a lot, but he's probably learned a lot since he shot our movie, and he's going to be a really good sound person. The other one was actually a very experienced sound person who was Martin White, and he did a week on our film, and this was just like desperate pleading on Facebook and like reaching out. I didn't know sound people in Georgia. And so we had people show, we had people help. Sometimes it was a high schooler.
Sometimes it was me, and that was not fun.
1 or 2 days, Anna did it. A couple days, my AC, Michael, did it. And he said, I've learned that I hate mopping.
I especially hate doing it while trying to direct. I don't recommend that.
And Michael was my AC because I didn't think I was going to need an AC. And then I was just like floundering because I was trying to shoot on tripod or shoulder and pull focus and carry lights. And I was just falling to pieces trying to do it all by myself. So I was like, I need like at least someone who could PA for me, you know? And Michael came on, learned a lot, super, super helpful. But he was just finishing high school.
Yeah.
And he did it for free. Incredible.
For the experience. And yeah. So anyway, crew. Those are some creative ways to get your crew. And then when he went to edit, he found a place that would give him just a little time to learn the machines for free. And then he had to start paying for it. And so he said he could rent the machine over a weekend for £100. And he did the whole rough cut in 3 weekends. And then they start submitting to festivals. And they said, we sent a lot of tapes out, and one of the judges at a very prestigious festival liked it. Even though we didn't get into that festival, she recommended it to San Francisco. And he said, my experience this far with the festival world has been that I've never got into a festival that I've applied for or where we've had to pay an entry fee. The film needs to be invited. So I think that's interesting. He still did apply to this prestigious festival, and that was beneficial because the judge liked it and recommended it to a different festival that it was a better fit for. So it kind of started doing this little festival circuit. It sounds like once it got into San Francisco, they started asking for money, and they raised £3,500 additional to finish the film in time for the festival. And for them, that was a good time to start asking because they could say, hey, we got into this festival and we need to finish the film to actually be able to show it and take advantage of this opportunity. So they raised some money and got it finished up and ready to go.
Nowadays, the industry might be a little different. The festival world, in my opinion, you might have a hard time getting into any prestigious festivals if your film is not totally, totally finished, unless you've got star power or name talent.
Hard to
But
know.
you
We're
never
still
know.
going through that
You never know.
process. So
Regardless, Napoleon Dynamite was a rough cut, and that got into Sundance, and that was the big break for Napoleon Dynamite, as we've talked about.
yeah.
Following, it sounds like didn't get any major film festivals, but it did its job.
Well, it sounds like it did go to Toronto after the San Francisco. It got picked up by like a production company that helped raise additional funds to refinish it with even better sound
Good
equipment.
sound, and like they polished the image.
Yeah, and made it look really nice. And then they were able to plan to release it at Toronto. So
But there's like a by the seat of their pants sort of like approach to this that I really appreciate, where they're like, okay, well, we'll start to kind of just move the thing forward and like submit it and then finish it and then pull in a little bit more money and then finish it a little more and then release it kind of. And it's really interesting because they asked, have you made any money from following? And Emma responded, no. So it's like, that wasn't really the point of the film. And they didn't need to make money because it wasn't like they had debt to pay off.
mhm.
You know, they needed to make a movie. And what happens when you make a movie? You've made a movie. And there are very few people who have made decent feature films. I'm not even saying great feature films. Decent feature films, resourceful films. And why was Following so good? Following is an exceptional first feature.
Yeah, it is
I think
very
it's
good.
exceptional. I don't think most people realize that it was exceptional. It wasn't even getting into major film festivals at first. It's been released on Criterion now, and I've seen it, and I thought it was impressively well done. And so it just shows, it leads into some of these things that he says at the end. There's a quote here where he says, "However you have to make a film with whatever resources you have, treat making that film, however you're making it, not as a means to an end, but as the best film you're ever going to make. If you're making it for money, then you're never going to do it, and it's never going to be any good." I like how he says, you're never going to do it, and it's never going to be any good, because a non-existent film can't be good. But it goes to show that maybe if by some miraculous power you do get money and you do end up doing it, if you're doing it because you're waiting for money or for the money, it's probably not going to be good, even though it does exist. And then he says, do something you believe in, something you love, and enjoy it. I think that's really pretty powerful. It's hard. I'll say, I don't know if they had children when they made the film. I doubt it, based on the fact that they had so much weekend time to themselves to work on this thing together. But I don't know if there's anyone listening who's in the same boat as Anna and I, but that was one of our biggest challenges. I've seen a lot of my friends make films, some of them with their spouses. And I don't know if I've ever seen parents do it together on a feature. I'm sure it's happened, but especially
I can't think.
But especially with
either.
no money. With no money, that hard to do. But I really have always been inspired by the fact that Following, unlike almost any other film I've ever heard of, was shot on weekends. I think that's just really cool and inspiring. And it just shows that we all have certain resources, and one of those resources is time. And if we don't have a lot of time, it's compounding effort.
Well, and then there were ways that served them. They talked about how they shot kind of in continuity because it was over time, and so if things changed, they could kind of play it. It would naturally match up with time passing, and there was a lot of time to think about, and prepare for what they were going to shoot because they were shooting so little at a time. So there are ways that was a great advantage to them, I think. And I think it's true with any of our obstacles. We mentioned children, and yet our film features our children. So in a way, we had that advantage that we have children we could work with and use.
I was going to say we didn't have to pay for those kids, but that's a partial truth.
We constantly have to pay for those kids, but we'll keep them. So
it's a subscription service.
So anyway, the challenges that you face, I think, can also be your resources. It can be what makes your film unique. It can be an advantage that sets you apart. So a few of the bits of advice that he gives to new filmmakers, I'll share a few. He talked about getting into festivals and how people would say, well, what do you want to do next? And he said, if you don't have a specific thing, you can't capitalize on that moment. I've heard this from a lot of people. So that's something to think about. I don't know that you have to have it totally done, but having the next film in your pocket ready to go is a smart move to make once you're finishing up, so that when people are excited and ready, you're also ready to go on the next thing.
And here's another tricky thing. He said, make a film and enjoy it. Don't be thinking about what's the next thing, the thing after that. Well, but he just said you need to have the next film ready when you're doing the festivals. Well, the tricky thing with Following is he mentioned how long post took on the Following because it was just a long, slow process because of their limited resources, but they just went with it and finished it. But by the time they finally finished Following, because it was slow and there was lots of gaps and some pauses in between, they could sit down and just say like, okay, I got another idea for a movie, and just sort of slowly develop that idea as there was time. So by the time they got that thing into festivals and it was getting some traction, getting some attention, he was actually prepared with the next film. He says nowadays he doesn't really do that. He really finishes a film and then starts the next one. But it's very common that like that thing is in its infancy in terms of ideation once you're well into post, or maybe even like you've locked the edit, like at that point you can start to kind of come up with ideas, but you really want to stick with a film as long as possible. I think that's true. I'm feeling like that more and more. Obviously, my time and attention are divided because you and I are both still parenting and running multiple businesses and having to, you know, do things that are not living off of the money that we were paid to make this first feature, because we weren't, And so it makes sense. It makes sense that on the first film that's going to be a little different, but there's always going to have to be life balance. It's not like you're ever going to be like, now I am the personification of a filmmaker and I do nothing but exude films. It's like you put money in me and I put movies out of me. It's
Well,
like you'll always have to like balance your life. You'll have to like exercise and sleep and go to the grocery store and think about eating. Well, you grocery or order groceries on your phone at least, and you'll probably want to read stuff and have meaningful romantic relationships, and you might raise children. Like those are all big priorities that divide your attention. So if you feel like your attention is divided now, well, it's just a little bit more divided is all. But you have time. I mean, he says that you need time, which doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be working full time on it.
Yeah, this is a quote from him.
It means time to throw some ideas together and then let them sit, go off and do something else, come back and see what still feels right and everything. So he's like, if you've got no money, you've got time, and you can let that simmer through your life and finish the film.
It's another thing that can feel like a stumbling block, but it can also be an advantage where, it takes a long time when you are working another job and when you are still doing other things, or your resources are limited, so it's just slow moving. And yet you can use that time while it's slow moving to start developing the next thing. So he already actually had written Memento, his next feature film, and was ready to go when people asked him, what do you want to make next? And that's his advice. He says, you have to have your next film ready. Getting into festivals helped getting an agent, but no one's going to offer you your next film. You have to have it ready. He said, before San Francisco, I met with a few agents who wanted to look at what I wanted to do next. So I sent them my latest screenplay, which I'd spent a year doing, and one of them agreed to take me on. So, yeah. And then I guess the last little note here that I love is he says, films are subjective. What you like, what you don't like. But the thing for me is that is absolutely unifying is the idea that every time I go to the cinema and pay my money and sit down and watch a film go up on screen, I want to feel that the people who made that film think it's the best movie in the world, that they poured everything into it and they really love it. And I really think that comes across, whether you mean it to or not. Your intentions in making a film, your experience in making the film, I think it all bleeds into the film itself, and the outcome and the result for people watching it is that they will feel, if you truly enjoyed making it, they'll truly enjoy watching it. Or if it's really something you feel passionate about, they're going to feel that passion. If it's a stressful experience, it might add to the stress of the film, which might be good or it might be bad. But all of that kind of carries over. And so
my next feature film is titled Stress.
That's what I'd love to experience and make a film about.
So we all go to the theaters to feel.
No, but I do think at the end of the day, make something you feel proud of that you love. And then at least you like watching it, You're going to have to watch it more than anyone else. So it's worth making sure you care about it.
I'll make my last disclaimer here, which is that might be harder to do than to say. Just because if you're anything like me, I have a lot of insecurities about the things that I think are most significant in my life or that I have strong feelings about. And making films about that stuff feels, for some reason, your brain's just going to tell you that like no one cares about that stuff, or that it's dangerous, or that no one agrees with your points of view, or that you can't say certain things in public. I don't know. Like I've got lots of those anxieties, honestly. And this, I am working on a script a little bit when I have time right now. And I'm surprised actually at how personal some of the views are in it and how scared I am to write it. I can't. Anyway, So I'm just saying that because you're likely going to feel some things if you're writing something that's very personal with your resources and you're trying to put everything you've got into it. There are days you're going to love it and have a great relationship with it, and there's days it'll be really hard, but hopefully you can push through and get the thing made. And I think that when you do actually make films that are scary to write, those are the films that are probably going to do the most for your career and for your life moving forward as a filmmaker.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think there's so much we can learn from Christopher Nolan, his experience. We all know, that led to additional opportunities in his career quickly exploded. And I think he gave some really great advice that we tried to include here. So good luck making your feature. And again, you can download our free checklist. There's a link in the show notes to do that on making your feature film. To launch your career, we also have a free 21-day challenge to just work on your film 10 minutes a day, which I think is great because he talks about shooting for 15-minute days. And
Not 15-minute days, 15 minutes of footage a day.
That's true, but still,
Big difference.
it just shows that a little can go a long way.
That's production, but writing, he was probably writing once a week on weekends, just the same way that he, or he was writing in the evenings. You can work 10 minutes a day and once again, if you do 10 minutes a day, you'll start to get a rhythm. It's a powerful thing. So try out the challenge, you guys. It's a free resource, and we're seeing a lot of people have a lot of success with it right now. So jump on and check out the resource that is.
Yep, that's a great one. And we do always pick one person a month to win a free membership in the Feature Filmmaker Academy who's completed the challenge. So that's also an opportunity you can look into and don't want to miss. You'll learn a lot. And yeah, we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us today. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, you'll love the Feature Filmmaker Academy, a program designed to teach anyone how to finance and finish a feature film.
There are many resources teaching you how to do a great job, but what they don't teach you is how to get the job in the first place.
You cannot have a career making feature films until you've made at least one. Anyone can make a feature film using our proven model.
It's risk-free. If you follow all the steps in the program, you'll finance and finish a feature film, or we'll give you your money back.
Learn more at invisiblemansion.com/feature filmmaker or click the link in the show notes.
If you find this free resource valuable, we'd really appreciate it if you leave us a review or share it with another filmmaker.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.